Most people think attachment is love, that holding on tightly is how you prove you care, that needing someone or something is a sign of connection. But Carl Jung saw something deeper. He believed that unhealthy attachment is not love, it's fear. Fear of loss, fear of change, fear of being alone with yourself. We attach because we don't trust that we're enough without the thing or person we cling to. We attach because we believe our identity, our worth, our sense of safety depends on something outside ourselves. But that's exactly where the suffering begins. The moment you place your peace in something external, you give away your power. You become shakable. Relationships end, people disappoint, dreams collapse, plans fail. And when they do, if your identity is attached, you collapse with them. Carl Jung believed the path to becoming unshakable starts with letting go, not in a cold, detached, emotionless way, but in a conscious, grounded, self-aware way. Letting go doesn't mean you don't care. It means you stop needing things to go a certain way to feel okay. It means your center is inside you, not out there. But let's be honest, letting go is terrifying because it forces you to confront how much control you never really had. It forces you to ask, who am I without this thing I'm holding on to? And most people would rather cling to chaos than face that question. We hold on to toxic relationships because at least they're familiar. We stay in jobs that drain us because at least they're predictable. We obsess over outcomes because uncertainty feels unbearable. But Carl Jung would say that your transformation lives on the other side of that fear. And the first step is this: recognize what you're clinging to, not because it's healthy, but because it's familiar. And ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I let this go? Because often, what we fear isn't loss, it's exposure. It's standing naked in the mirror of our own identity, without a title, a role, a relationship, or a status to define us. But that's where the real work begins. In the letting go, in the falling apart, in the quiet that comes after the grasping stops. That's where you find something deeper, something stronger, not built on control but on presence, not dependent on others but rooted in self. And that's the foundation of becoming unshakable. Letting go doesn't mean becoming numb. It means learning how to hold life loosely, without crushing it under the weight of expectation. Carl Jung understood that true strength isn't in how tightly you hold on, it's in how gracefully you can release. When you stop gripping so hard, you start to see clearly. You begin to notice how much of your identity was tied to the roles you played, how much of your worth was outsourced to validation, how many of your choices were driven by fear of not being enough. And that's not your fault. The world teaches attachment. From childhood, you're taught to be rewarded for approval, to seek safety in routines, to define yourself by what you have and who accepts you. But Jung's work was about unlearning all that. It was about returning to something deeper, something unshakable within. He called it individuation. It's the process of becoming whole, not by addition, but by subtraction, not by collecting more, but by releasing what isn't you, letting go of the mask, letting go of the fear, letting go of needing to be anything other than exactly what you are. But this process isn't glamorous. At first it feels like death, the death of old identities, the death of illusions, the death of certainty. And that's why most people resist it. They confuse comfort with safety, familiarity with truth. But comfort can keep you small, and familiarity can keep you asleep. Jung believed that only when you let go of who you think you're supposed to be, can you meet who you actually are. And that's where freedom lives. Because once you stop needing the world to behave a certain way, you're no longer a prisoner of your circumstances. You stop trying to control people. You stop reacting to every shift in energy. You stop chasing things that don't align with your truth. You become steady, calm, rooted, not because nothing bothers you, but because you're no longer dependent on anything external to define your inner state. This is what Jung meant by being unshakable. It's not a lack of emotion. It's the presence of depth, a knowing that runs deeper than drama, a self that stays grounded when everything around you moves. And that kind of presence, it's magnetic. When you no longer seek approval, people feel it. When you no longer chase love, it comes differently. When you no longer need control, life starts to open. But it all begins with one moment. The decision to let go. We think control protects us, that if we manage everything just right, people won't leave, plans won't fail, we won't feel pain. But Carl Jung saw the truth beneath that illusion. Control is just a mask for fear, a strategy to avoid uncertainty, a way to shield ourselves from the chaos of life. But here's the paradox. The more we try to control, the more fragile we become. Because control builds walls. Walls between us and reality. Walls between us and other people. Walls between us and who we truly are. And when life doesn't obey those walls, which it never does, we shatter. But something powerful happens when you let go of control, when you stop gripping outcomes, when you allow space for things to unfold. You discover you were never safe because of control. You were safe because of presence, because of your ability to return to yourself no matter what changes. That's unshakable, not rigid, not detached, but deeply present. You no longer fear uncertainty because you trust your ability to stay centered through it. You no longer panic at endings because you've learned how to begin again. You no longer collapse under chaos because you've made peace with not knowing. And slowly, life starts to flow differently. You move from tension to trust, from control to clarity, from grasping to receiving. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means your actions come from alignment, not fear. You speak from truth, not performance. You love from wholeness, not need. You walk through the world not seeking power, but embodying it, and others feel it. That groundedness, that quiet confidence, that steady energy that says, I'm not chasing, I'm not clinging, I'm here. That's what letting go gives you. It strips away the noise, the proving, the panic, until all that's left is you, real, rooted, and awake. Most people think peace means everything around them is calm. No problems, no chaos, no uncertainty. But real peace, the kind Jung pointed to, has nothing to do with what's happening around you. It's about what's happening within you. Letting go doesn't make life easier. It makes you clearer. You stop wasting energy trying to force outcomes. You stop obsessing over what people think. You stop rewriting the past in your head, hoping for a different story. You accept, not as surrender, but as alignment. You stop arguing with reality, and that frees up your most valuable resource, your attention. You begin to see what actually matters. You begin to respond instead of react. You begin to live, not in fear of loss, but in presence with what is. Carl Jung saw that the human mind is wired for attachment, but attachment becomes suffering when it turns into dependency, when your mood depends on someone's approval, when your self-worth depends on how much you achieve, when your sense of safety depends on external validation. That's not love, that's a contract with anxiety. But when you let go, really let go, those contracts start to dissolve. You no longer need every relationship to work out. You no longer need to fix people. You no longer need to control the ending, because you've begun to trust something deeper, yourself. Not the version of you that performs, not the version that always has answers, but the version that's real, even in uncertainty, even in mess, even in stillness. And that version doesn't seek validation. It brings presence. It doesn't chase security. It creates inner stability. That's the root of becoming unshakable, letting go of what was never yours to carry in the first place, so you can finally carry yourself. And when you do that, something shifts. You start to choose differently, from alignment, not fear, from self-worth, not self-doubt. You speak up, not to prove, but because your voice matters. You walk away, not to punish, but because peace matters. You pause, not out of fear, but because stillness holds answers noise never will. This is how transformation unfolds, not in a single breakthrough, but in 100 quiet decisions to release what's heavy and return to what's true. Letting go isn't about giving up, it's about giving in to what's real. Because here's the truth. When you stop needing something, you finally get to see it clearly. The relationship, the job, the goal, the identity you've clung to for years. You see what it is, not what you hoped it would become. And that clarity, it's not always comfortable. It asks you to admit when something no longer fits. It asks you to walk away, not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. It asks you to choose growth over attachment. And that's hard, because part of us still wants to believe that holding on is strength. But Jung believed otherwise. He taught that the psyche thrives on wholeness, not control, that the soul doesn't grow through clinging, but through release. And when you let go, truly let go, you create space. Space for new insight, new direction, new energy. But first, there's a silence. A space between the old and the new, between what you released and what has not yet arrived. And that space can feel like loss. It can feel like floating. But that's where trust is built, not in the noise of certainty, but in the stillness of the unknown. This is where you learn to anchor in yourself. You no longer outsource your peace. You no longer define your value by who chooses you. You no longer collapse when plans fall through. Because now, your identity is no longer tangled in outcomes. It's rooted in presence. You're not trying to predict life. You're responding to it, not from panic, not from wounds, but from awareness, from trust. This is what Jung meant when he described individuation, not just discovering who you are, but releasing who you're not. And what you're not is fragile. What you're not is desperate. What you're not is powerless. You are what remains after letting go. You are what rises when the illusions fall away. You are the calm beneath the chaos. And the more you return to that space, the more you realize you were never broken. You were just buried beneath what you thought you had to hold. So what does it actually mean to be unshakable? It doesn't mean life stops testing you. It doesn't mean you become immune to grief, disappointment, or uncertainty. It means you're no longer defined by those things. You feel them, you move through them, but they don't break you, because now you don't resist life's flow. You ride it. You don't need everything to go your way. You meet whatever comes, knowing you won't lose yourself in the process. This is the transformation Jung pointed toward. A self that is not controlled by ego, not tethered to outcomes, not addicted to identity, but a self that is free, integrated, and deeply present. And here's the quiet truth. Most people never reach this place, not because they can't, but because they never learn how to let go. They stay attached to versions of themselves that are outdated, to stories that keep them small, to people who reflect their wounds, not their truth. But you're here, and you're listening, which means some part of you is already letting go, already releasing the weight, already choosing clarity over chaos. And that's enough. You don't need to rush. Letting go is a slow unraveling, a daily decision, a quiet kind of strength. The more you practice it, the more you'll notice things shifting around you, but more importantly, within you. You'll stop over-explaining. You'll stop begging to be seen. You'll stop fearing endings, because you'll finally realize What's meant for you doesn't require your grip. It meets you in your clarity, not your desperation. And what's not meant for you, you'll bless it as it leaves. That's not detachment. That's peace. That's strength. That's the unshakable self Jung believed we all carry, buried under the noise of attachment, waiting in the quiet for us to return. So if you're still holding on to something that's weighing you down, this is your invitation. Loosen your grip, trust the process, and watch who you become when you finally let go.